is Keys to the Shop, Founder Friday edition. Today we're talking with Justin Shepard of Spencer's Coffee in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Well, hey everybody, and welcome to another episode of Keys to the Shop, where we give you insights, inspiration, and the tools you need to grow as a coffee service professional. My name is Chris DeFirio. I am your host for the show, and I'm really glad to be your host for the show. I'm glad to have been doing this show now for almost 5 years now, and it's all because of you faithfully listening to the show, sharing these episodes, and also subscribing. If you're not subscribed, definitely do that now. You'll always be updated with new episodes. And also, if you want to help the show out, a great way to do that, not on top of sharing these episodes with a friend or with your team or other coffee shop owners that might not know about Keys to the Shop, is to leave a rating or review. If you like what we do, it would be great if you leave a 5-star rating or review. It doesn't take much time over at Apple Podcasts. That really helps the show's ranking. It helps people find it when they're searching for resources. Now, Keys to the Shop, on top of doing the podcast, offers consulting and coaching for your business. Keys to the Shop consulting is all about not just helping you avoid needless mistakes, but helping you build foundations for the present and future of your business. And so that means if you're just opening a coffee bar and need advice and guidance and someone to walk through the process with you, or if you're an established business and you need to improve your operations, your people and leadership, or your quality, just take things to the next level. If that sounds interesting and you want to find out more, let's have a conversation. To schedule a free discovery call, just email me, chris@keystotheshop.com, and I really look forward to having a conversation with you. Again, that email for Keys to the Shop Consulting, chris@keystotheshop.com. Now, today's episode is brought to you by Prima Coffee. Prima Coffee is one of the best suppliers of specialty coffee equipment in the world. Not only do they curate the best equipment from all over the world, but they also work with you to make sure you're getting the right equipment for your business. And that kind of support is really important because it's a big investment to put into equipment when you're just starting out, or if you're expanding or upgrading your commercial equipment. It's a huge investment, and you want to make sure that you're making the right decision. And that's one of the great things about Prima Coffee. They're all about helping you be successful in your coffee operation. Keys to the Shop listeners can get 5% off their entire order by using the code KEYS5 at checkout when you go to prima-coffee.com/keys. Use the code KEYS5 at checkout. That's KEYS, and then the number 5 at checkout, and you get 5% off your entire order. It's really a great deal. Definitely take advantage of that. And if you're in the market for commercial equipment and you want to make sure you're working with the best, then I highly recommend you go check out prima-coffee.com/keys. Today's episode is also brought to you by the Pacific Barista Series, a line of plant-based performance beverages that enables you to serve your customers the absolute best plant-based beverages they've ever had. The Barista Series is designed for the specialty coffee community, and before anything ever hits your shelves, or before they launch a product in their extensive line in the Barista Series, they bench test this stuff with some of the world's best baristas, making sure that it performs on bar. Gives you amazing texture for latte art. It stands up to the heat from the steaming process, and the final beverage is really focused on the coffee. All of these things are definitely important for your customers, and it's important that when you're serving them, you serve them the best. I really think that you can't go wrong with the Barista Series from Pacific. Look them up over on their website, pacificfoodservice.com. Get it in your store and try it for yourself and see what I'm talking about. I think you'll agree. The best option for you and your customers for all of your plant-based beverages is the Barista Series from Pacific. All right, everybody. Well, today we are going to be talking with a good friend of mine who has been a pillar in the coffee community in Kentucky for a long time. And I so admire the way he leads his company, has developed this company. And that is Justin Shepard, owner of Spencer's Coffee in Bowling Green, Kentucky. Justin left a career in journalism to pursue running a coffee shop along with his wife, Shelley, back in 2005. And in the years since, he and his team have transformed Spencer's Coffee from just a quaint downtown cafe to a sustainable and ever-growing company boasting 2 locations now, and a third set to open very soon, in the next few months, actually. In addition to a full menu of coffee and espresso, house-made pastries and made-to-order breakfast items are also served at both locations. And the original downtown location also features a lunch menu along with a rotating selection of craft beer. And over the years, Justin has also been host to the Kentucky versus Tennessee Throwdowns, which have not only been some of the best throwdowns out there, and you might remember Justin actually being a guest on the show in a previous episode talking about how to host a great throwdown. I'll link to that in the show notes. But these throwdowns have raised a ton of money for charity, and this business is one that I really admire because in all the years that Justin has owned this business, back in 2005, they just got their second and now almost third location, but their expansion has been pretty much internal, making the business better and better over the years. Justin is the type of owner who wants to kind of improve the operations to the point where we can now make a second location, and that will be intuitively a really good move. I have a lot of respect for that, and so I was really excited to talk with him today. We're going to cover a host of very relevant topics for you today, and again, such a pleasure to have Justin featured on Keys to the Shop on our Founder Friday episode for July. So without anything more from me, let's get right to this conversation. Here now is my interview with Justin Shepard of Spencer's Coffee. Well, Justin Shepard, I'm really glad to have you on the show finally. Wanted to do this for quite a while. How are you?
I am doing really well. Very busy, but, as a dad and business owner, the school year is wrapping up when we're recording this. So we've got lots of end-of-year activities going on and stuff like that, but it's been good.
Good, man. I mean, well, this last couple of years especially has been, I say couple of years because we're well into this one, but being a business owner is not easy already. But then on top of that, everything that's been happening has been just a whirlwind, of course, for everybody. But in the midst of it, I know that, you've expanded and you've been on a steady and consistent course of really deepening the foundations and roots of Spencer's and expanding the concept now to a second location. We'll get into that, but for the time that I've known you, for the last few years here, I've always considered you a pretty solid and consistent, operator, and example of somebody who's just persistent and making great decisions. And so I'm really excited for this conversation. So, and a great place to start, of course, is the story of how you got into this position as the owner of Spencer's. What was the genesis of you in coffee and then you at Spencer's?
Yeah. So first off, thanks for the encouraging words there. The shortest that I can make this story to be useful on a podcast is that I grew up near Louisville in a town called Shepherdsville, which is my direct ancestors founded that place. But I moved to Bowling Green, Kentucky, which is the home of Western Kentucky University, in 1999 to go to college and study journalism. Ended up getting a job at the local newspaper, which is about 2 blocks away from the Spencer's Coffee, the coffee shop that I own. But I didn't own it then. So as I was working the newspaper and sort of dropped out of college slowly, I kind of trickled out of college as my job became more. I got married in 2003 and was working in the newspaper, and I would come to Spencer's Coffee, which had opened in 2001. A couple from San Francisco had moved here. The husband was an art professor, and the wife wanted a coffee shop like she was used to having, I guess, wherever they had lived before. So they opened the coffee shop, named it after their child, Spencer, and I would come here, multiple times a day to get coffee. And I was kind of hating life at the newspaper. There were things I liked about it, but I had a really odd schedule, number one, and not a lot of room for upward movement, and started to toss around the idea of opening my own business. My first thoughts were bookstore and record store. So these were, again, 2003. This was before Amazon and Spotify really sort of shoved the nail in those industries' coffins. And but I would call bookstore owners and record store owners that I knew or that I had heard of and ask them, how do how do you do this? Like, what do you think about this business? And I remember talking to a record store owner from Louisville who told me in no uncertain terms, do not open a record store. You will become suicidal. It's the worst business ever. Anyway,
Wow.
lots of discouraging conversations in those initial days of trying to figure out what I was going to do. But my wife, Shelley, actually, said to me, maybe those people that own Spencer's would want to, sell it to us. I had told her, about them, and they were really awesome. And yet you could sort of tell that they maybe didn't. I thought the place had a lot of potential that they weren't realizing. And I could tell that the business was starting to wear on them. And so after some discussion that took, a few months of sort of negotiating, and we purchased the business in 2005. We got an SBA loan. This was pre-housing crisis. So I basically, went to the bank and had some ridiculously optimistic sales numbers that I had I don't know where I came up with them, but I said, we're going to make this much money and, this and that. And we got the loan. There's no big deal. So we bought the business in 2005 and I sort of jumped right in.
Wow, that's quite a story. And it must have been such a relief for you, especially coming from, a place where you were really hating life. And now it's like, it must have felt like you had a new lease on life, not to be too, punny there, but really this is a new adventure that you previously had no experience in. So while it might be exciting, it must have been somewhat intimidating as well.
Yeah, it wasn't intimidating at first, mostly because I didn't know any better. My wife Shelley had a decent job at the time, and so when we first bought the business, I took no salary. $0 were taken out of the business account to pay for our living situation. We lived pretty simply, and my wife was making the money, and I would, come to work every day. I was behind the counter. I inherited 4 employees from the people who had owned the place before, and I just worked every day in the coffee shop as a barista and cashier and cook, whatever thing there was to do. And I didn't know anything. I'd never taken a business course, never been all that interested in food. I did drink a lot of coffee, but I didn't know. Looking back on it now, I didn't know anything about specialty coffee or what was good or bad, whatever. And so we just kind of went along that way for a couple of years, and then in 2006. Well, yeah, I guess it was like a year and a half. In 2006, my first child was born, and we wanted my wife to, stay home. She wanted to stay home with Lewis is his name, and I wanted that as well. But the problem was I still wasn't taking a salary, and I didn't see any way to do it. So I ended up returning to the newspaper and working 40 hours a week there, and then I would work another, 35 to 40 behind the counter in the business. And it was really one of the worst times of my life were those early years of owning the business. There were points where I really regretted the choice. I wasn't making the money that I thought I was going to make. It was a lot harder than I thought it would be. I didn't have a good grasp on cost of goods or labor cost or any of those things that your listeners are used to hearing us talk about on here. I didn't know any of that stuff, and eventually, say it was maybe 2007, 2008, I ended up with tens of thousands of dollars in unpaid tax debt to the IRS because I was trying to do my own accounting. I was again still taking no money from the business at all. It was really, really terrible. And at that point, I called an aunt that I have, Aunt Imogene, and she is an accountant. And why I didn't ask her for help, I don't know, but she helped me in more ways than I can say. And she did the accounting for me for probably the next 10 years, really helped me focus on the business itself. And, by God's grace and a lot of hard work, we got through that. And, things are really great now. I love my work now, but the first few years were really, really hard.
Wow. I mean, I think a lot of people would have just been like, well, I'm not going to keep owning this coffee shop. I'm going to sell it. Now that I'm the owner.
Yeah, we tried that.
Yeah.
We tried to sell it. We did. We had conversations with a couple people, but, we had bought the business and thought, oh, it has all this potential. And again, we didn't really know what we were doing. Once we started talking to people who would be interested in buying a business, who knew what to look for, they said, well, your business is not worth anything. So selling it was not really, it was an option we thought about, but it was not an option that anyone wanted to take us up on. So,
well, when you say potential and you're thinking not in the coffee industry, but you looked at it, you said it had potential. What exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah. So I guess, what drew me to doing this in the first place was just sort of the community building aspect of the coffee shop. So, Spencer's Coffee is situated on the downtown square of Bowling Green, which is sort of a mid-sized city. I think our population's up to about 75,000 people now. And, it's just sort of a cool community hub. We're a few blocks away from the campus of Western Kentucky University. So we have students who are customers. We have all the downtown type of people. So, attorneys, bankers, lawyers, I guess attorneys and lawyers are the same thing, but professionals is what I should say. And just an eclectic mix of customers. And that was sort of what drew me to the business in the first place, was interesting mix of customers. I always, found this real bright spot in my day of leaving work and going to, grab a coffee, and that maybe I would run into someone I knew and I would strike up a conversation, and just that whole social aspect was really what drew that was the potential I saw. Let me put it that way. That was the potential I saw. And, they were serving good quality coffee from Bongo Java out of Nashville at the time. And it was definitely the best coffee available in Bowling Green at the time. And so I knew I had a good product, and I knew that there was, real potential in the space. I could see, if people will come and try this, they will really enjoy it. What I didn't understand was, what does it take to run a business? What does it, the economics of it, how does that work? I thought it was pretty simple, and it turned out to be, more complicated than I thought. And I'm not a numbers person, and going into business and not being a numbers person, I think puts you at a little bit of a disadvantage. You can overcome it, I think, but it's been challenging.
Unless you have an Imogene, and then it becomes a little easier.
Right. And I was so, I don't know if I was prideful or ashamed. I've heard people say that, sometimes you have this coin, and on one side is pride and the other side is fear. And you have pride, you try to humble yourself, you flip it over and you're afraid. And that's definitely been a recurrent theme in my life. Not to get super heady here, but I wasn't humble enough to ask for help at first, and it took kind of hitting near rock bottom of realizing I don't know how to do this, for me to ask for help. And then, and we'll talk about this some more, I'm sure, but as we've grown, realizing what I do well and what I don't do well, and knowing how to get help for what I don't do well has been, sort of key to us growing, and then in recent years expanding.
Right. Now you are in this position of owning a coffee shop in what many would consider the middle of the hockey stick graph of specialty coffee third wave growth. 2003 through 2010, 9, whatever. Can't really put an actual number on it, but I remember those days, and there's a lot of learning going on. There's a lot of people that were still like running the 90s style coffee shop, but venturing into V60s, venturing into single origin espresso and other things like that. When you came on and started learning about coffee, I mean, this happened at the same time you're learning about business. How was that journey for you? And when did you reach a point where you became saturated enough that some of this, the coffee knowledge, the business knowledge, became muscle memory, and now you can improvise a little bit more rather than just like practicing like power chords in business? You know what I mean?
I don't remember the exact timing of it, but I do remember that, when we bought the business in 2005, the way the coffee was served, as just one example, we had the air pots out on the counter for the customer to sort of serve themselves their coffee. We would take their money, we'd hand them the cup, and then they would get their coffee. And they had a medium roast, a dark roast, a flavored coffee, and a decaf coffee to choose from. So every day we had 4 air pots out with these different options of coffee.
Nice.
And, and we sold a ton of flavored coffee at the time. I wasn't a big fan of it, but it sold well, so we sold it. And, over time, what you're saying is absolutely correct. I remember, reading, Scott Rao on like coffee.com, which some people will remember. This stuff wasn't super accessible, although it was becoming accessible. And so, when the big shift for me happened was in that moment of, I don't know what I'm doing. I've got to figure it out. When my aunt said, I will take over the numbers piece, you focus on the business piece, was really when I started to think about, how can we make the coffee even better than it is, number one, but also having all those coffees all the time was a real waste of money, as you can imagine, because we're constantly dumping coffee to try to keep people's options open. And so, we started to, at the same time, pare down our menu and think about, what's going to make this the best product, but also what's realistic for us as a company. When single origin espresso became sort of all the rage, I remember one of the earth-shaking coffee experiences I had was ordering a bag of single origin Ethiopia. I don't remember the exact name behind it, but it was a single origin Ethiopia from Brown Coffee out in Texas. And this was, when they were sort of like the new hip roaster that was doing cutting edge things. And
right.
Got that coffee in and, followed Aaron's recipe and tasted it. And I was just blown away, like, oh, I didn't know espresso could taste like this. It was really great. But when we tried to put that into our cafe setting, it didn't work. The customers weren't really interested in it. It wasn't our clientele. Bowling Green is not large enough that there's a huge pool of people who are into super high end, coffee only flavor experience. There are those people, but there's not enough of those people to sustain a business. And so that's also been part of my journey, has been taking what I've learned from, cutting edge, broader specialty coffee industry trends, and then whittling it down to what's going to be accessible to the marketplace that I'm in, because I'm not in a Louisville or a Nashville or a New York City where I can find enough of those niche people who are going to be interested in this niche product. I've got to figure out a way to serve a quality product that lots of people will want to have. And then we can do some of that niche stuff on the side, but it's definitely not the driver of our business.
Yeah. So you're playing to the community in Central Kentucky, not Portland, not New York City, where most of it this time, Seattle, Portland, New York City, these are the places, San Francisco, even. They're the hub of all information. If you're anybody in specialty coffee, you're probably following tons of people around those cities. And so that's pretty interesting to try to whittle that down and I would say appropriate it, except that's kind of a bad word these days, but customize it for your audience. And I wonder how that went. So obviously at one point you got rid of flavored coffee and you made some changes to push the envelope a little bit. And a lot of people that have what they would consider a winning business recipe where we're selling a lot of flavored coffee, we're selling, this stuff. Why would I stop selling that? How did you manage the transition in that time and still continue to gain customers?
That's been part of our journey as well. It's been 15, 16 years now that we've been doing this, and what we serve every day and even the way we serve it looks, very, very different from where we started. And I think I mentioned it before, part of that has been paring the menu down. As I've become more business savvy, I've realized that, you've got to sell people what they will buy. And just because you like it doesn't mean everybody's going to like it, number one. But also, number two, just because your favorite customer likes it doesn't mean that anybody else likes it or that you need to keep it. And so, with flavored coffee, it was definitely, it frustrated some of my customers when we finally took it away. And it was a gradual shift. There was a product on the market for a time that was like an additive that you would put into, you grind up normal coffee, right? Whatever you had, and you would put this scoop of flavoring stuff in the filter basket with it. And so when we shifted from buying flavored coffee beans, we shifted to that product. We told our customers what we were doing, but we're like, hey, we've got this new option, and if you want this, this is how we're going to do it, and it's going to be by the cup. And so that was around the same time that we, started offering pour overs, clevers, or whatever we were doing at the time. I don't remember, but those people sort of just drifted away. Some of them stopped coming in. Some of them shifted to, I'll just have like whatever you have. I don't want to wait for the pour over, so I'll skip the flavored coffee and I'll get, the house blend or whatever. And some of those people stuck with us, and some of those people sort of faded away. And it's taken a long time for me to learn that it's okay to lose a few customers if what you're trying to do is going to be more sustainable long term. That's a scary prospect when you're making no money to lose any customer. But over time, to be true to myself, and for my, to make sure that my team is proud of what they serve. We try not to serve anything that we're not proud of, that we wouldn't, enjoy ourselves. But at the same time, we try not to force anything on the customer either, if that makes sense.
No. It makes perfect sense. Like, you having respect for the customer, and we even just talked about this, like changing things, or a shift break called eliminating menu items humanely. It sounds like you were doing just that, trying to take away something, respecting the fact that people had become used to it, replacing it with something that's kind of an alternative, but still unapologetically going forward with progress. And I like that it was based not just on a sense of coffee nerd righteousness, but on financial stability for your business too. Like you mentioned in the beginning, there's a lot of waste that happened with that, and paring down the menu made financial sense, and I guess moral coffee sense for your situation. So that's really cool. And as you started to do that, and you started to get a grip on the business, I wonder if you would compare and contrast, like you mentioned the numbers and the cost of goods and whatnot, the state of things in the very beginning versus what you shoot for now, or what you realized that you needed to shoot for, and you eventually achieved in terms of, your cost of goods and some metrics that allow you to say, okay, I know that this is a solid business now because we're hitting our marks, our key performance indicators, if you will.
Yeah, well, one of the breakthroughs for me was after I handed the numbers over to my aunt, and we would talk, and I would think about the business. At some point, it hit me, and this sounds so elementary now, but this was years into my ownership of the business. It hit me, I should see how much it costs to make the product. We sell food here. We've always had a food program. They had it when we first bought the business, and we kept it. But we served one of our most popular food items was a chicken salad sandwich, and we made the chicken salad. We still actually do, and we make it by hand from scratch, like pretty much every day. And I remember thinking, I wonder how much this sandwich actually costs to make. And when I did that math, I realized we are literally losing money every time we sell this sandwich. Like we're not just like not making very much. We're losing money at the price point it is and the way that we make it. That was one of the huge light bulb moments for me that led me to delve into those numbers on every item. And that is really tedious, but it was really necessary for me to do. And I had to understand the cost of every item that we made. And then, down the line, the next step was to go, okay, how long does it take us to make this? Another step down the line, how much space does this take up in my stock room? And is this really an efficient use of space to keep this, niche ingredient item that maybe we only use in one thing and it's hard to get? And when we run out, people get mad, but it's hard for us to keep it in stock. All that sort of stuff was hard for me to focus on in the beginning because I was so concerned with just, keeping the business going, making sure the open sign got turned on and turned off and all that kind of thing. But, as we've grown and as I've trusted others to do things like open the store and close the store and count the money, then it gives me the room as a manager or owner to focus on sort of those bigger picture items like, menu building, food costing, all that good stuff.
Right. So losing money on chicken salad sandwich to now, obviously, you're not going to put a menu item on your food menu or coffee menu that you're going to lose money on. But you're probably like most businesses that have loss leaders and other things that are not. How do you manage that now with deciding what gets the axe, what gets put on the menu, and that kind of framework or that construct for saying, okay, this is the kind of the recipe for a winning menu item that we're going to have on Spencer's menu?
That's a great question, and I don't know that I have a concrete answer to that. There's no magic formula, at least there's not one for me. But I think there's definitely a matrix of, what does this cost to make? How simple is it to make it? In other words, how does it affect the workflow? And how many people will, come back for this item? The workflow piece is pretty critical because we've had items in the past that we were super excited about. Say we'll run a drink special. A barista comes up with a really great drink, and it has a handmade syrup and it has, some other interesting ingredient, but it takes a lot of steps to make it. And so, we'll run that special for a month or so. We're probably not going to bring it back if it gums up the workflow because it makes the, transaction take longer. There's always that like ingredient that all your baristas they grumble when they have to make it, we got to make ginger vanilla syrup again. I hate this stuff. If it's making your team grumble, like maybe you should rethink doing it. There's a matrix of workflow and cost and how excited do people get about it? I think after this long is sort of built into our systems. We don't write this down and plot it on a chart every time we decide to do something, but it is a discussion that we have. And, we've eliminated popular items from our kitchen because they just took too long to make and we couldn't figure out a faster way to make them. But we've also kept some items and, bought new equipment and come up with better systems just so we could keep making that item. Mm-hmm. Sort of a balancing act of, how much of this are you going to sell? How important is it to what you're doing? And can you make it work for your team?
Right. And that's so important because I think if you created a menu item that made financial sense, but like it impacted that workflow, it's not just impacting the, what do you call it? The morale of your baristas, but it's also impacting the morale that your customers have because they can sense that. It's like when people have pour-over bars that aren't well set up and the baristas don't want to sell pour-overs because they don't like making them. And so people just get, dissuaded from ordering them at the register. So it's good to have that balance. And of course, if something is costing you like 60% cost of goods to make cinnamon buns or something, but you really like cinnamon buns, you probably shouldn't make them. You can make them for yourself at home.
Right.
Right. So now that you have some good margins, and I assume your labor cost is within that range that's acceptable, that 25 to 30% range, or either you're going for that, your cost of goods are in a similar or lower range for menu items like food, beverage. You've got that stuff. Now, that improvisation we were talking about, like you've got the handle on the basics. You set your sights to do more with the business than it did when you first got there. So I know you made some steps to kind of put more roots down, expand the offerings. What were your first steps besides just making what it already did better and profitable? What was the next step in expansion?
Yeah, so there have been a lot of steps. We've actually done what I would consider expanding quite a few times now. The first of those being we had, when I bought the business, we had the old cushy, comfy chairs, massive furniture sort of thing going on, pretty small space. And I think we had maybe 25 seats. And so I remember getting frustrated at how few seats we had. We would get full. And so we replaced that furniture with, smaller, less comfortable furniture. That took us from maybe 25 to 45 seats. A few years later, once the financials were a little better, we spent some major money, at the time for me it was anyway, doing a renovation to the business that allowed us to expand from the 40-something seats that we had to about 80. And so once and again, keep in mind for your listeners, we're sort of a restaurant. I call us a coffee-centric restaurant. Coffee is definitely the backbone of the business, but we do sell a lot of food. So we went from, 20 seats in 2005 to like 80-something seats. I think it was maybe 2012. I don't remember. It's all blur. But so that was expansion number one, was just renovation that enabled us to add more seats.
Was that a wall that you tore down or something?
Yeah, we had we had like a big studio space in the back that we would rent out to other people. It eventually became my office and a storage room. And then we got some access to a little bit more storage space. And so we were able to make this expansion work by taking over the back part of our next door neighbor's business. We're in one of those big brick downtown buildings that all the walls are shared, that kind of thing. And so we expanded, and then another few years down the road, we expanded our patio, which is in the back, and added seats to that. Another couple of years, 2018, the next door business actually closed, and so we were able to acquire that space. And that's what we have today. So now we have, pre-COVID, we had 120 seats inside and another maybe 50 outside. So pretty massive. And that's sort of the end of expansion for, a single location. I don't see any way that we could make it any bigger and stay sane. So that was when we decided, the next logical step is to open a second store because, we still get full more often than not. And we have customers who don't come to us nearly as frequently as they would like to because they don't like driving downtown. They can't find parking. And then even if they do all that, they come in and there's nowhere for them to sit. So that was what led us to look to open a second location, which we now have open, and it does have a drive-through. And I'm sure you'll want to talk about that. So I'll just wait for your next.
Well, yeah, for sure want to talk about that. Before we do that, though, you always offered beer as a program there, because you also do that, and I imagine you've in the process had to grow your team to handle the 120 seats from the 4 employees that you had before. So you're expanding not just the physical space of your location, but also the stuff that you do in that space and the people that you have as employees in that space. You as an owner have obviously grown immensely to be able to handle that and put managers in place. To me, that internal expansion is pretty fascinating. And talk a little bit, before we get into your second store, talk a little bit about how that went and the process of delegation, hiring more people, and expanding your offerings.
Yeah, so, when we did that first renovation that I spoke of earlier, we moved the kitchen to the back of the building. Previously, the front counter where we would make coffee and take orders was directly connected to the kitchen. And so it was not uncommon for, any one of my team to take your order and then walk over to the espresso machine and make your drink, and then maybe hop back in the kitchen and make a sandwich. They would do all these things. That was what working here looked like. When we did the first renovation and moved the kitchen away from the back counter, that, required that we have somebody stationed in the kitchen all the time to do nothing but make food. So that was the first big change, was, adding a kitchen staff proper. The beer piece of the puzzle is not a huge driver of business for us, but it was something that we added mainly to give Bowling Green some craft beer options, which there were very few of when we first got our beer license, and also to utilize our outdoor space for the occasional beer garden sort of event in the evenings. And you can't do that without a beer license. So, it wasn't as simple as, well, we're just going to have this beer event, one night a month. We had to get the same license for that you would have to get to serve alcohol in any way, shape, or form at a restaurant. So once we got that license, it only made sense to have, a few bottled or canned beer options up front for people. And we've since added taps and have a couple beers on draft. We still keep a pretty limited beer menu. I think we have, anywhere from 8 to 10 options at a time. And again, it's not a huge driver of business. It's maybe 10% of what we do, if that. Is definitely the easiest 10% because you just pour it. It's a lot less complicated than making a latte or a sandwich. But
yeah, it's a batch brew of alcohol.
That's correct. Yeah, it was just a way. One of the things for me has been, and for my wife as well, and for a team as well, I think is to say, what is the kind of place I would want to spend my time in if Spencer's wasn't here, and what would that place have? And then we try to make Spencer's into that. If I were living back in Louisville, I could go to Quills or Sonnergasse or Heine Brothers. I can think of a bunch of different places I could go and have a good experience, and I wouldn't need a Spencer's there. But in our town, there's Starbucks and there's us. There are a couple other coffee shops that kind of come in and out, but we've really striven to be the place that serves the things we want to enjoy in the atmosphere that other people would want to enjoy them. And that has sort of driven how we expanded. We make our own pastries. The reason we do that is because we want a certain kind of pastry and it's not readily available for us to buy, or we think we can, do a better job of it and make economic sense for us. So that's been sort of the fuel behind the expansions. But to get back to your original question, to trust your teams of people to do their jobs, that's, for me as an owner, the challenge is always based on trust and to communicate, my vision well enough that somebody else gets it, and then I can trust them to execute on it. When I'm not trusting people, it's either because I've hired somebody that I don't trust, which is something that you should really never do, and I try not to do anymore, or it's because I don't have a clear picture in my head of what it is that I want, in which case I need to sit down and do the work of articulating, into systems and procedures and things like that, what it is that the job entails, what needs to be done, how is it to be done, all the good E-Myth stuff.
Now, trusting people to take care of the space. You've got a large, how many people do you have working for you right now?
Between both stores, I think we have about 40 people.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, and you have managers, obviously.
Yeah. So, the way that we're set up today is that Nate who's been with me off and on for about 10 years. He's sort of the operations director. In other words, he's sort of the manager for both stores. And then we have a cafe manager who's sort of an enhanced assistant manager over each store who, takes care of day-to-day things like inventory and does most of the employee training and things like that. And then we have another guy, Ben, who is in charge of coffee and who does all of our coffee training. He keeps up with the baristas to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and that the machines are working right and that the products taste the same between both stores. And then we have a kitchen manager, KT, who she also works in both spaces, sort of oversees and directs all our kitchen staff to how they do their jobs.
And you meet with all of these folks on a pretty regular basis. How do you end up staying abreast of all that's going on in Spencer's and making sure that things are, verifying that things are getting taken care of?
Yeah, that's a good question. And that's one that I'm still answering. Realistically, we've had the two locations now for, it's still a little under a year. And I'm in the process myself of sort of becoming the owner versus the owner operator, which is a shift for me, and I'm learning. And I've got friends in coffee in places like Center Goss and Louisville and Palace Coffee and Amarillo, like people who've done this before me that I've heavily leaned on for advice, direction. But part of that, is meeting regularly. We have a sort of a leaders meeting once every 2 weeks where we sort of discuss, how everything is going and particularly the things that affect everybody. And then I try to meet one-on-one with each one of those people on a pretty frequent basis to, answer any questions they have and, give them sort of coaching and direction. We have almost never hired anyone from outside the business to take a management role. Everybody has, started at the bottom, so to speak, and sort of worked their way up into the positions that they have now. And, Nate, our operations director, he is, going to take over most of the sort of managerial role that even I do. And I'm working on that right now. So, because in the fall, we're supposed to open a third store and, I'm going to need the bandwidth to really focus on that. And then, moving into the future, I don't know what that's going to be, but it's sort of an organic process for us. And yet I'm trying to build it off of good foundations that other people have already set, so that I'm not trying to reinvent the wheel or whatever.
Yeah, that's a really great approach. To hear you talk about this, and then to have people realize that you've been doing this well over a decade, and developing this business this way. It wasn't just an opportunistic grasp for expansion or delegation. It was, like you mentioned, organic. That's a perfect word for it, because organic takes its time. It doesn't really rush into something that's not naturally occurring. When you do that and you skip steps, you end up with a very unstable product or fruit, or in this case, coffee shop. And a lot of people exercise a certain lack of patience with this type of thing. And I was just thinking, if somebody did open like another coffee shop that stuck around in your town, I mean, your roots are so deep and you've grown this with such good foundations over time. I mean, you've got great security in this business. And so that's really admirable the way you've gone about it. Now you've been working on these structures, and it's the second store expansion, but this happened in the midst of COVID. I mean, was this something you had already planned on and just executed in the midst of COVID, or was this an idea, an opportunity that came up in the middle, just, out of the blue, and you said yes to? How did that kind of happen?
Well, we had anticipated opening a second location for a long, long time. I think I was looking into this as early as 2009, and I kept being presented with ways to expand our downtown store that made the second location not really necessary. And so we kept doing that as those opportunities arose until they didn't, were sort of peaked. And so a second location became almost a necessity. Like, this is the only way to grow the business. I was really convinced that a drive-through was not the way to go. I don't think of myself as like, I want to go to the drive-through coffee place. I want to go to the coffee shop and sit down. But my wife, being a practical woman, she's hauling my kids back and forth to school. She's, doing this and that. And she's like, so many of our customers come only occasionally because they can't get in and out, because they can't leave their kids in the car a block away, and they don't want to get them out and walk them in. And so, my wife, Shelley, really convinced me, okay, the drive-through is a reasonable thing to want. The question then became, how do we do this in a way that has integrity, in a way that I'm not ashamed to have it? And so, put a lot of thought and work into how we were going to set that up. Hard to explain on a podcast, but, we've done things in the drive-through setting, like making sure that when someone pulls up to the, microphone stand, that we say, hey, this is Justin, welcome to Spencer's, or whatever, so that there's that personal feeling that they would get from across the counter. We've done things like added visual cues on the menu to help people know what they're ordering, right? So someone orders a coffee with cream, we've got a chart that has color variations of cream right there on the menu that they're looking at. And we say, look at the chart. How much cream do you want?
Nice.
So they want the 3, simple but interesting things like that we've sort of added to make the drive-through piece more palatable. But that decision was based around, again, who are the customers in our community? What will be helpful to them and make them want to come back? And also, what would we want to see, right? So if I was going to go to a drive-through, which I wouldn't prefer to, but if I was going to, what would I want it to be like? And so that's what we tried to design. But of course, when COVID hit back in March of last year, we had always initially intended to open the cafe space there first, and then to add the drive-through piece once we felt settled. Cafe is what I know how to do. Drive-through is new to me. So COVID flipped that on its head, and so we opened the drive-through in June, and we only opened this cafe up to seating about a month ago.
When I saw that, I was just like, this is perfect. That's the perfect move. People need this right now, and if they can't get in-store service or the dispensers that they're used to, having that drive-through is just clutch.
Yeah, I mean the reaction from the community was great. Tons of our regular customers from downtown that weren't coming because of the pandemic, they were, we were seeing them in the drive-through day in and day out. So the timing on that, like you said, was pretty perfect, pretty fortuitous for us. I don't want to make light of a global pandemic, but we've been sustained through it, and it just happened to kind of work out. And now moving forward, the other opportunity it provided us a really forgiving time to figure out how to operate a drive-through. People were just so glad that we were there that they were willing to put up with the fact that orders took longer than they should have, or that the headsets didn't work, or whatever, the window is stuck, like all this stuff that I've never had to worry about before and try to figure out. People were real forgiving with that. So that was a big help to us.
You had been practicing your business for so long, and translating that to a second location, even though it must have been a bit stressful to open this new concept, it wasn't your first rodeo at this point. Even more so now for this third location. So I wonder, how do you feel like going into this now with two stores? Is the lessons that you've learned through your expansion to the second store making the third one a little bit easier to forecast and plan, and not so many butterflies about?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, my story is one of the first, 15 years of being in business was just adaptation. I bought an existing business, and we over and over and over adapted it to make it sustainable, to make it, grow in terms of customers and staff both, in the physical space. So we were constantly changing these things. And so when we, went into the second location, it was really awesome and also really overwhelming to design a space from basically scratch. I mean, we had the shell of the building we had to work around, but otherwise, I got to put things where I wanted them, build the counters as high as I wanted them, and, all this sort of thing. So that was cool. Our third location, which is supposed to open in the fall, is going to be more or less a kiosk sort of setup within the commons area of a new multi-million-dollar renovation of the library at Western Kentucky University. And the university approached me about that a couple of years ago when these discussions started. And the process on this one has been considerably different because most of it is kind of out of my hands. So I've got to, sort of design where I wanted the equipment to go, how that workflow was going to set up. But I had the constraint of the physical space where I'm going to be, but also I've got all the resources of the university on architecture and contracting and all that stuff. None of that is in my hands. I've helped with the planning, and now they're building it out. I've not been in the space yet. It doesn't exist. We're still working on it. So for us to open in the fall, number one, I think it's optimistic. I'm a little skeptical that it's going to get done by then, but it might. But there's not a lot for me to do right now. We've begun taking applications for staff there because we anticipate that most of the people that will want to work in a location like that will be people who live on campus. So a lot of students. Campus is not the easiest place to park, so it would be a hard sell for too many people to just drive there and go to work and leave. But we started taking those applications, and then our plan over the next couple months is to, start hiring a few of those folks, get them in to one of our existing stores on a part-time basis, just to get some initial ordering and coffee making training. And then hopefully, if we play our cards right, when the university gives us the green light, we can sort of jump right in there and just go.
Wow. And it's such a great story. I mean, just hearing about this from taking over an existing coffee shop, not knowing what you're doing, but just having a dream for what it could be. And then 15 years later, seeing what it is now. I mean, does it look like you imagined the potential in the beginning? I mean, is it more satisfying now to look back on it and say, like, I could not have imagined that it would have grown to this particular, because I didn't know. But I mean, what does that feel like for you at the end of 15 years and then looking to the next 15?
Yeah, I mean, there have been a lot of surprises, some pleasant and some not so pleasant. My wife and I really thought we were going to be making like a 6-figure income, within a couple of years of buying the coffee business, and that did not happen. And to be perfectly frank, has not happened. But at the same time, the business has definitely grown in a way that I didn't anticipate. And we've been able to do things that I didn't anticipate. So, I didn't set out to sell my own pastries and have beer and have this massive like social hub downtown, or to have a drive-through was never in sight. To go on campus was never in sight. None of that was sort of anticipated. So that is, fulfilling and rewarding to watch. I think the thing that probably I'm proudest of at the moment, and the most excited about going forward is to, now go from being that owner operator and make all those sorts of decisions myself and sort of hold very tightly the jewels of like coffee shop ownership, and start to hand those off to other people, to my leaders, and to give them that same fulfillment of like, I built this, I made this, I made this decision, or I, intervened in this situation in a way that helped someone else. I got to see these employees under me grow. That's the most rewarding part for me, is just to, every 2 weeks when I push like pay on the payroll system, I love doing that. I really do. I love being able to, provide some work that is potentially meaningful. And I say potentially meaningful because you can totally be a barista or in a kitchen and just work yourself to death and hate life. I've seen people do that, but, doing customer service, doing, food prep, those can be really fulfilling, jobs for those who sort of embrace them. And I love being able to offer that to people who come and work for us. So that's super fun.
I love that that's your most proud thing. That, I mean, paying it forward, I suppose, or, providing those livelihoods for people. To hear you say pressing pay during, for people's paychecks is one of the most thrilling things. Really, I think anybody who has a boss like that is lucky to be working for somebody who's got their best interest in mind and is getting fulfillment from their success. Yeah, that's really a great thing. So I guess we could talk a lot more. It's 15 years of history in an hour, I suppose.
Right.
There's a lot more, but my final question to you would be like talking to owners and operators out there who want to develop a deeply stable business and expand and kind of take after what you've done from all you've learned in these past 15 years. What would you tell them? What advice would you give them moving forward?
I'm not sure how applicable this is to everybody. I think depending on your personality type and your skill set, maybe you can do things a lot differently than I did them. So take this with a grain of salt. But for me, I'm the 100% owner of this business. I have no outside investment, no partners, anything like that. For me, it's been a process of constant refinement. we didn't open our second store until we'd been open here for, I had been in the business for 15 years. The business had existed almost 20. And sometimes I look back at that and I think, man, it took us a long time. But in that process, we were refining and expanding to the very limits of what we could do in our single location. And, other owners told me, when you have 2 locations, your life is going to look so much different. And, my job description has changed many times over the past 15 years. But I look back and I'm glad that we didn't open that second store in 2009. I'm glad that we didn't open that second store in 2014, because we probably could have pulled it off, but we weren't ready. And, today we feel like we're absolutely ready. And all the refinement has taught me and, my leaders under me lessons that we couldn't have found any other way. I've read a lot of business books, and you and I talk about that sort of stuff when we're not on the podcast about, what books are we reading and stuff. And those are super helpful. But to put those into practical, application and then see the results, I think for me has been critical. And I think the other thing I would say too is that, for me in a mid-size, what I would call a mid-size town of 75,000 people, my path is going to look different than a roaster in Portland, Oregon, or LA or something like that. Our path is going to look different, but that's okay, because it gives me some opportunities that those people don't have as well. There are benefits to that, and so our growth is necessarily going to be a lot slower. I don't have grand hopes of global domination or anything like that. But as long as we keep filling the seats that we have, and we keep having potential customers that we're worried, are not getting the best experience possible, then we'll keep expanding and growing.
I love it. Well, you're obviously serving your community very well. You're serving your team well, and I appreciate your example. And I appreciate you being on the show. How can people stay in touch with what you're doing? Tell us where we can go online to learn more about Spencer's.
Well, if you're ever in Bowling Green, just put in Spencer's into the phone, and if it sends you to the mall, you're going to the other Spencer's. Go there. But yeah, we primarily use Instagram at Spencer's BG. We post, as most companies do, pretty frequently on there about what's going on with us. But ultimately, we don't have a cool blog or any of that kind of stuff. You can go to spencerscoffee.com. The website is a little out of date, so bear with it. But, we do have stuff that we sell there. We sell, we do ship our coffee, around the country, and T-shirts and stuff like that. So, but basically just come see us when you're in Bowling Green. When you're passing through, we're between Louisville and Nashville. We're an easy stop off the interstate.
It's a great shop. I second that. I love going there, and you're doing great work, man. I thank you again for all that you've shared here. You're one of the greats, and I really appreciate you.
Well, Chris, thank you so much. I've listened to the podcast pretty frequently, and I'm honored to be asked to be on it. So
100%, man. Thank you. Well, I hope you all got a lot out of that episode. A huge thank you to Justin Shepard for joining us on the show and sharing the Spencer's Coffee story. Again, I have so much respect for what they've done down there and the mentality they have for improvement and leadership, expansion, and it's really a solid company. And Justin's a solid guy. So again, thank you, Justin. If you want more information about Spencer's Coffee, you happen to be passing through Bowling Green, Kentucky, this is obviously the place you need to go. To find out more about Spencer's, go to spencerscoffee.com. You can also follow them on Instagram over at Spencer's BG. BG stands for Bowling Green, in case you need me to explain it to you. Spencer's BG on Instagram. Now, if you have any questions, comments, or feedback from me about this episode, or of course any episode of Keys to the Shop, I always love your feedback. How are we doing on the show? What do you want to hear more of? What have we not covered on the show that you want me to talk about or a guest to talk about? I really want to hear from you. To do that, just email me, chris@keystotheshop.com. That's also where you can reach out for Keys to the Shop consulting, chris@keystotheshop.com. And with that, that is the end of our episode today. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me once again for a great Founder Friday episode. Have an amazing day, and as always, I hope that this episode has truly given you keys to the shop.